Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Reclaiming Soul Work. We are so excited to have you here. This is episode 6. And Reclaiming Soul Work is the place where we reclaim the sacred and soul work for healers, counselors, practitioners, and social workers, one episode at a time. Um, this is actually part 2 of our previous episode, Things That You Won't Hear Your Therapist About, but we're going to, we will. And we're really here to spill the tea on a variety of other topics going on in the world and impacting mental health and wellness spaces. We got some new buzz topics, like we're talking about talk therapy apps just a little bit, some drama going on with Cerebral. We're also talking about the controversy with the new launch of the Crisis Lifeline, the Crisis and Suicide Lifeline 988, and a few other important topics that we think are really important through our lens. So, you know, like, stay tuned, hang out for a while, get your tea or your favorite drink, and just kind of stay a while with us as we kind of get into these topics.
Thank you so much for being here with us. We are really excited to not only just kind of wrap up this second part to these really important topics, but also, we made it to 6 episodes. Thank you all so much for your support. We are really excited about what's to come. Yeah, just thank you for everyone's support, sharing, commenting, sending us good vibes and energy about, this podcast and the focus of things. And so Reclaiming Soul Work is a heart-centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. My name is Sequoia. I use she and her pronouns. I live and work in Anchorage, Alaska on Denaina land. I am a therapist, a social worker. I wear a few other different hats and artists. I'm also a caregiver and auntie. Um, I really have been recently enjoying, even in the summertime, pho has been like my go-to meal recently for some comfort. Um, what else do I usually say?
Wait, what did you say?
Pho,
What's that?
soup, basically, just
Ooh,
soup. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just some Asian comfort food, broth,
ooh, sounds good.
noodles, either chicken or beef or vegetarian, lots of vegetables, extra
Mm,
spicy for me.
I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And then yeah, I am just really excited to, like I mentioned before, just be here. And yeah, Biani, you want to check in?
Sure, I'll introduce myself again, or my name is Biani. I live, work, and play in Philadelphia on Lenni Lenape land. I'm also a caregiver, a parent of 3, a therapist, tarot reader, writer, um, and yeah, I think that's it for me. I am sort of like, I think one of the things right now that's really bringing me joy is, um, yeah, I mean, it's been hot with the heat waves going on. So it's been nice to really spend intentional time indoors, and I'm reading some really good fiction. So
Hmm.
that's been bringing me joy right now. But I think I'm gonna have to try some like comfort food. I think that's what I'm ready for this phase of the heat wave. Yeah, that's
Sounds
me.
good. Sounds good. You ready to hop into what we got coming
Yeah.
up? Okay.
So yeah, we got a lot to cover, y'all. So we hope that if you're tuning in, be ready. And if you have any like comments or suggestions or questions as we're talking, please put it in the comments box. Or if you're watching the replay, let us know, like, share your thoughts or feedback in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to our channel, Reclaiming Soul Work Podcast. And even better, subscribe and then share it with somebody that you think might really like this vibe. So let's get into it. Um, I feel like we say this every time we meet, but there's so much going on in the world. And there's so much going on like around mental health and wellness, like in those spaces in particular. Um, I was mentioning it earlier, like we think it's important for us to make space for it here. Like there's so much going on, but what do people like us have to say about it, right? Like spiritualists, spiritual social workers, queer femmes, like through our lens. Sequoia and I, we think we have an important lens. I wouldn't say it's unique, but it is an important lens, So we think it's important that we talk about these things, and we're really just excited to be in the space to do that. And then, what's really going on, like I know in my part of the world, the heat waves we're like at week 2 of heat waves, and y'all, it's hot literally and figuratively. So I just want to make sure you hold that. Like, make sure you stay hydrated, make sure you keep your peace or find rest, because it is literally hot on so many levels. And I think we can find ways to cool down by bringing some things into our awareness, being in community, and really speaking truth to some of these things that we are being presented with. So I just wanted to share that before we begin. So here are the order of things, in case you want to prepare. We're going to start with talk therapy app drama. We're going to talk a little bit more about Brene Brown and intersectionality. And we're going to get into a conversation about the role that white practitioners play in co-opting our language. The conversations around accessibility, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because there are so many conversations about accessibility that need to be had. We're also going to talk about this new 988 line that launched July 16th. And there's a lot of controversy around it, and a lot of important conversations are being had. And we want to bring it into the fold with y'all. And we're also going to talk about long haul COVID and sort of making space for that too. So if you have any kind of thoughts or feedbacks or reflections on any of those topics, feel free to share it in the comments. We'd love to be in conversation with you. So first, let's begin.
Okay.
I will share a little bit about, do you want to, okay, perfect. I was going to say, hey, Sequoia, do you want to start? No, go ahead, please. It's hot, y'all. I told you it's hot.
So yeah, we one of the kind of topics that is carrying over from last episode was our topic about BetterHelp and Talkspace currently being in the headlines and the news, because they are a little bit in hot water related to data mining and confidentiality, and what their algorithm is doing with folks' data that access those platforms for mental health services. And so for folks who don't know what BetterHelp and Talkspace are, they are mental health platforms that attempt to make therapy through text, phone calls, and chat more accessible. And we saw a big boom in those type of platforms during the pandemic, during COVID, one, because folks weren't able to kind of get out and about. Also, there was a lot of focus on, I would say, like healing, mental health, grief, navigating being in a pandemic, right? At least in my lifetime, and I'm a geriatric millennial, I've never been in a pandemic before.
Hey.
And
I don't
so
like that term. No.
we the older
Right,
cusp
we the
of
older cusp,
millennials,
right.
you
We the
know,
elders.
and
We the elders
so
of the
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it
No, I'm
because
fine. I'm joking. I'm fine with it
I
too.
see,
I embrace it.
yeah, I see things all the time related to that. Anyhow, back to what we're talking about. So, we talked about that last episode, so definitely check that out. But another one, and I sent Biani this TikTok from a nurse practitioner that was going over this other platform called Cerebral, and the one of the ways that Cerebral is a little bit different from BetterHelp and Talkspace is because on Cerebral, folks were accessing this for diagnosis, also medication. So more kind of focused on the medical aspect of mental health as opposed to, or in addition to, the talk therapy kind of aspect of it, right? And so one of the things that was really controversial about Cerebral, and if you just do a quick Google search of Cerebral 2022, Cerebral 2021, you'll see that it was either the CEO or the COO resigned last year, right before a lot of this controversial information started to come out about the ways that not only they were using the data from that particular platform, but then also how folks were accessing their prescriptions, getting medications, um, their response time related to calling folks back and things like that wasn't the best. Biani, is there anything you want to add about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that stood out to us was also that there was a trend that they were noticing in the data where clients were getting overly prescribed for a particular diagnosis. And according to this really thoughtful researcher of a psychiatric nurse practitioner, that there was a way with the app to um, to get more medicine. Like you can create like another client profile in a way with Cerebral that makes it possible for, like, let's say me, I'm a patient in the system, and then I can like create a new account and get the same medication again. And there was like a way that they weren't really tracking that sort of error, that kind of malfunction in their system. Um, and I just think, one, not only is that so concerning, but um, the fact that, it's like they're not being honest about the data mining piece either. And what does it mean when the focus is on profit? Like that somebody can create I mean, I know that that's hard to control, and I imagine they're working on it now. But there were people, they found the same client creating profiles and getting more medicine than is like appropriate for them, And we can assume that that extra medicine could be for selling it or whatnot. And so, and then practitioners were talking about how they felt pressure to diagnose people so that they can take medicine, so they can
Mm-hmm,
get medicine.
mm-hmm.
So this is in line to what we were talking about last episode. You definitely want to check out the last episode. Um, I'll also say too, if be sure to sign up for our newsletter, because we also try to go deep into some of these conversations as well, around the role of technology and things of that nature. So yeah, I think the question that comes up for me, and maybe we can kind of close out and move to the next topic, is like, how do we navigate this in this climate? Like as practitioners, as spiritual social workers, as counselors, like what does it mean to do this kind of work in this climate of therapy app platforms? Because that's not going to change. Like that happened with Cerebral, but we're going to see a lot of that happening with other apps. So what does it mean for our climate? And feel free to answer that question if you like in the comments, or share with us your thoughts of the experience. If you had experience with therapy apps, please feel free to share. This is just some things for us to think about.
Definitely, definitely. The other thing that we have here too is, what does that mean for clinicians and their license? Especially if you are, and I could see this more on the nurse practitioner side, but then also um, on the mental health side too. If they're reporting that folks that were subscribed to this particular platform were duplicating their profiles and receiving more medication than, they would normally have access to. What does that mean related to, uh, as you mentioned, Biani, overprescribing, fraud, things like that, ethics related to folks that are licensed? What types of safeguards are in place for
Mm,
clinicians in those, in those roles? Biani and I are in a few Facebook groups, that are for clinicians. And, just like with any other kind of Facebook group, there's different type of, specific groups, like groups that are specifically for people of color, therapists, or if you identify within the LGBTQIA plus community, there are therapy groups related to that. But some of the things that I saw, related to complaints for therapists that were not only with Cerebral, but many of the other mental health platforms, is these platforms don't seem like they pay, even the like an average rate. That's what I want to say. They don't seem like they pay an average rate, and so we have this issue of a livable wage, if you would, a
mhm.
livable rate. The potential to be caught up in these types of scandals, if you will, related
Mhm.
to being employed by a platform that is using information inappropriately, overprescribing, so on and so forth. And it's like, what's the cost benefits analysis of that? The convenience of being remote and being at home, the accessibility of it, but then it comes with all these other things, potentially a low rate, having to see an exorbitant amount of people just to be able to make a decent amount. And then also, as I
Yes.
mentioned, just, these things coming out in the news and so on and so forth. So I know we've gone over our time related to this topic, but this is just something that I just get so, I'm very passionate
No, but
about
you're
it,
right.
not only just on the client side, but also on the therapist, the provider side.
Well, this is about accessibility, and we're probably going to be able to get into it after this topic. Like, we're talking about accessibility and the spectrum of accessibility when we're thinking about clients and practitioners, and who still benefits, right? Because when we're talking about
Hmm.
accessibility, these companies still benefit. Like,
Hmm.
Cerebral's mistake is huge, and they're still here. Like, they're still here doing this, and we don't know what else is going. Like, what else could they be doing if this is a
Hmm.
big mistake that they made? What else is going on that we don't know
Hmm.
about? So yeah,
Hmm.
totally. Um, so we wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about Brene Brown. It's such a hot button topic. If you are a practitioner, social worker, anybody who's in the field of, you know, doing this kind of work of, case management or direct service, like, you've heard of Brene Brown. And it's interesting because I have found that, and I was thinking about it from our last episode that you might want to check out. Like, I am one of the people that have used her work and have found many limitations with it. And I found myself like couching it too. Like, all right, I want you to have this frame of what that vulnerability and shame. Like, let's think about the framework, but then feeling limited by it because it's so like it's like this way that we can look at it in other professions and fields. Like, I find that what gets a lot of popularity are things that are universalized, you know?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and the risk of that is that it allows white practitioners to co-opt things that become universalized, right? And so Brene Brown's heavy focus on individualism that we hear a lot in therapist spaces, and not just that, but practitioner spaces. Like, it's such a focus on the individual and no analysis or critique or space to look at the role that systemic bias plays, colonization plays. Like, when we're talking about shame and vulnerability, how do we not have an intersectional or racial analysis, right? Or a decolonized perspective or important like grounding. And I think a lot of her work, while I really appreciate it, I do. And I have to say, it was before I became a therapist, I was introduced to Brene Brown's work. So I'm coming from somebody who did really benefit from her work. And I acknowledge the limitations too. It was never enough, right? Like it really wasn't. And I wasn't, I mean, yeah, that's like a side conversation, but yeah, y'all, like we do think that her work does miss the mark. And at the same time, I think she's really a part of a larger community of white practitioners who I think also co-opt the language of our people, of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Melanated peoples, um, people who are of the global majority, who've been talking about shame and vulnerability, and and maybe not in this language, right? But that work has always existed and has been done. I think about Du Bois's work, James Baldwin, Frantz Fanon, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, so many of the elders that I have soaked up their work have been talking about this stuff way before Brene Brown, right? Like, um, but I also think it's interesting because what does it mean for white practitioners now who co-opt that language? And I don't know if maybe it's a stretch. I'm not saying that she's co-opting certain language. I think she's missing the mark. But I think it also gets into this like, there are white practitioners not thinking that like there's certain things that is okay for them to do. Do you want to share more, friend?
Yeah, sure. I want to also just highlight what you mentioned about and I'm gonna mispronounce it, the universalized.
I don't even know where I came.
Y'all know,
I just made that
y'all
up.
know,
I don't.
y'all know what we saying.
Right,
Um,
right.
the
Universalizing. That just came to me.
yeah, that. Um, the issue with that type of approach is that it doesn't leave room for nuance, and our lives are so nuanced. It's very complex. It's not just black and white, it is a spectrum, you know. And so Brene Brown is a hot button topic for me, because of many of the things that we mentioned during our last episode. So definitely check it out. But then also in this conversation about co-opting of language. The other thing that this topic kind of brings up for me too, especially this intersectionality piece, is, and this is specifically related to in the spiritual community, where I see a disconnect between is on the therapist, mental health, social work side, we are a lot of our advocacy efforts, a lot of our fight is for culturally responsive theories and practices, ancestral types of practices to be incorporated into our work, that we are not kind of bumping up against best practices and things like that, right? And so, what I see a lot in the spiritual community is this use of different theories and practices that are mental health adjacent related, and it doesn't acknowledge the fact that a lot of these theories that spiritual folks are using and applying in their work are white theories, are white practitioners, are white spiritualists. An example of that would be attachment theory. So we see attachment theory used a lot in the mental health world and the spiritual world. A lot of folks who, carry similar values to Biani and I, we talk about attachment, but also give the caveat that, a lot of this is related to a white lens from a white perspective. And so use this lightly, right? Very similar to Brene Brown's work in kind of application and talking about it, right? Another example of that would be human design. I have not jumped on the human design train, but one of the things that I've been seeing, especially on TikTok, is there's a lot of Black women that are on the human design train, and that's fine. But what I also see is, and I can't think of what this individual's name is, but she talks about in her work, the founder of human design, and how this individual was white, and a lot of his kind of background is relatively a little shady, and that if folks would do a little bit more research on the founder of human design and his philosophies outside of that, then maybe they wouldn't support this particular theory. So when we're talking about things like co-opting language and kind of bringing it back to, this topic that we have here today, I think it's important for folks to be authentic, to know the kind of history behind a lot of the things that they're talking about, do a little bit more research. And so when I see white practitioners, using language like collective liberation and, kind of things like that, what we're talking about is the roots of a lot of our experiences and our meaning, people of color, so on and so forth, right? And so, what does that mean? Same thing with this conversation about Brene Brown, human design attachment. Know what the theories are that you're talking about, apply them in the appropriate way. I think I'm off my soapbox about that.
I love being on your soapbox. I mean, it's connected to the previous episodes we've had. So for those who are new to the podcast, welcome. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel, Reclaiming Soul Work Podcast. We'd love to have you. Thank you for joining us. And it is very much connected to previous episodes when we talked about spiritual bypassing. And it happens in therapist spaces too. I wonder what the name is for it, but there's a lot of bypassing in our community, in our profession. And I see it a lot with this whole rise in like therapist influencers in social media. Like I would say give credit, give credit to where credit is due. Like if you're gonna, I think co-opting is powerful manipulative technique. It's like a very manipulative technique. And it comes with like a lack of historical awareness, entitlement. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I can't, there's no time in this episode, but I feel like there's a lot of healing modalities and spiritual practices that have been taken from from folks that represent the global majority, without credit, without acknowledgement, without without acknowledgement, acting like it's okay for you to do that. And I feel like I see that a lot in social work. I agree with you. I think I didn't know about the human design founder. I tend to be very suspicious when things are trending. And I know that's like my Virgo sun and Aries moon. I know that's my Aries moon because I'm very like, oh, if it's trending, I need to be suspicious. Like that's where I go. Oh, it's trending. So it's something I need to really just like learn more about, be discerning, do some research. So that would be my invitation to some people. Like if something feels like it's trendy, like really ask yourself, what's calling you to it? Just really look within, cultivate some self-awareness and try to be discerning, because I'm actually thinking about another instance that I was trained as a breathwork practitioner, really love it. And it was very hard to find like BIPOC folks who were practicing that I knew of, because a lot of them were also, there's this trainer in the breathwork field who's caused a lot of harm. And it seems like a lot of the folks of color who trained with him finally separated and they were honest about it, which I really appreciated. But it also makes me sad because I think breathwork is an ancient practice that is very much indigenous, like it's existed in the continent of Africa. It's existed in indigenous spaces, but it got all this popularity because white folks were like, I'm a breathwork practitioner. I mean, we think about it in yoga too. Like, how do we remove breathwork? Do you know what I mean? So, anywho, just we want y'all to be discerning, y'all. Just be discerning. Let's move on.
Okay. Because I'm telling you, we could go on and on and on. Yes, definitely. So the next topic that we have coming up, and I just want to remind folks, that we have a newsletter, so please sign up for that. As we mentioned at the top of the show, this will be our last episode until we come back in September, and we're planning some new and fun things that we're really excited to roll out with you all. Um, in addition to signing up on the website for the newsletter, definitely subscribe to the channel. We also post on Spotify. So if you prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, follow us and hit the notification bell for Reclaiming Soul Work podcast on Spotify. And yeah, like, comment, and share. Okay, so getting into the next topic, which is accessibility. So we see accessibility and hear accessibility, kind of thrown around quite a bit. I feel like there needs to be more of a conversation about what does it mean, to uphold accessibility in different spaces and, make room for that, because accessibility can mean very different things, even if it is a value, right? Even if accessibility is a value, it can mean different things for different people. And so how do you make space to be able to honor, acknowledge, and uphold other people's needs, right? And so Biani and I have been talking about this quite a bit. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be accessible? We just mentioned it related to BetterHelp, Talkspace, and Cerebral, and the cost benefits related to accessibility of those types of platforms and, your mental health care, and then the compromises attached to that, especially related to like data confidentiality, so on and so forth. But when we get into this conversation about accessibility, what does it mean when we talk about that? Bianna, you want to hop in?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm kind of going to go through the angle of, it was a conversation we were having in the comments with a lovely um, supporter of the podcast. And um, something I want to say is that I think we have to expand our definition of accessibility
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledge the wide spectrum that it holds. And a lot of times, the conversations around accessibility feel really narrow, and um, they lack like not just nuance, but it really tends to silence the voices of people who are impacted by said topic or issue around
Mm-hmm.
accessibility. And the
Mm-hmm.
first one that comes to mind that I wanted to talk about, which might be a little bit of a different direction, so we can come back to what you were sharing, because I think what you're sharing is really powerful. I'm thinking about spiritual practitioners, wellness practitioners, mental health practitioners, and their ability to charge a rate that is in alignment with their ability to live.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this a lot on IG, and actually when I get on TikTok, I read in the comments, and there's such a conversation. Like, people either have an issue with practitioners charging a certain rate, and they get judged for it. They're like harshly judged for it. Like, oh, you're not about it. You're not about the movement if you charge this rate, or you shouldn't charge for tarot readings. That should be free. I've heard that a lot, especially as a tarot reader. Or um,
Mm-hmm.
like, you're not making therapy accessible if you charge that rate. And I've heard this not just from people who are on the side of being a potential client, but I hear this from therapists all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it helps, it really, it's important for us to sit with the question, right? Why is it that spiritual wellness, mental health practitioners, why are they not expected to charge for their services? Or why do people have reactions to those rates? And I would also take it a step further. When Black, Brown, Indigenous, melanated peoples charge for their rates, there's a lot of vile responses to it. I mean, really, I've seen it. I'm going by my experience, y'all. Like, I've seen the kind of negative transference, negative reactions people have to BIPOC folks or BBIMP folks charging for their rate. And this was inspired in the comments in the previous episode with a wonderful supporter who shared their experience too with that, where people were just very harsh with
Mm-hmm.
them. And I've experienced that too. Like people have been very mean about us charging a particular rate. And I think a lot of it is connected to history. A lot of it is connected to what gets projected onto people who have historically been oppressed and marginalized. Like we are expected to carry the load in a way that I find like white folks, including white queer therapists, aren't expected to. Um, and I wonder, right? Like the invitation that I'm offering is, what would it mean for us to hold capacity and access together, right? Like if we're talking about accessibility, right? Can we look at the spectrum a little wider, and can we include the practitioners in that conversation too, the people providing that service? I implore you to consider that. I think that I think we've gotten good at making access for the client. I think we
Mm-hmm.
actually, I'll say, we have a lot of conversation and resources around accessibility for the clients and not so much for the providers and the practitioners. I know that during the surge in 2020, the surge of like rising need for mental health services, it really led some mental health practitioners, including myself, to say yes to things that I had no business saying yes to. And what I mean by that, I didn't have the capacity, y'all. I didn't have the capacity. And yet, because I felt like, there was a need. And this is very common for folks who are
Mm-hmm.
in helping profession wellness practitioners. Like we do tend, I mean, it's great. I'm grateful. Like we have big hearts. I'm grateful. But I said yes to things that I should have said no to. And if you can relate to that, please share it in the comments. Please tell me I'm not alone. Please tell me I'm not alone in that. But just to disclose, like I said yes to things that I had no business saying yes to because I ignored my capacity. And so if we widen the spectrum of accessibility and include capacity, need, access, right? We can really we can have a understanding of accessibility that's inclusive, that does include like a disability justice framework, because y'all, your practitioners and healers are also navigating disability too. Like we're not quote unquote like fully healed from, like we're navigating the human experience too. And it's just something that I hope we can make space for. I think
Definitely.
that's what I'll stop
Definitely.
there.
Yeah. No, that was spot on, and we've talked about this quite a bit, that we've shared that experience. I want to, kind of bring it out a little bit. So I'm someone that focuses a lot as well on like systemic, and the ways that systemic kind of issues have impacted us on like a community and individual level. And so what I what I feel like I hear about this is, a devaluation in this particular kind of service, in this type of existence, right? So yes, there was a surge, but do people actually value, like what we're doing? And I don't want that to be triggering,
Come
but
on.
you
Come on.
know, it's along the lines of teachers or, other kind of service professions as well. Do you value mental health practitioners? Do you value that as a service? And so, yeah, I don't know. Like that's kind of what I hear related to that. Um, the other thing that I want to kind of mention about accessibility and devaluation of, services and spiritual practices and, things of that nature too is when we think about hmm, white practitioners. I look at white therapists, for instance, and, they a lot of their kind of starting rates for therapy is well over $200 an hour, well over $200. And I personally, I couldn't. I couldn't charge my clients that particular rate um, for a number of different reasons, but there are differences in the ways that we price our clients. And so when we think about that, for instance, and we can talk about that in a lot of different ways. Um, I have a wide variety of clients that come from, very different backgrounds. And I offer everyone my sliding fee scale. It's up to them related to how much they want to and can accommodate related to that skill, also depending upon how many times they want to see me a month, you know. And so when we think about that in relation to um, this piece about the surge and accessibility, there are compromises. And again, Biani and I sharing this experience, there are definitely compromises that I make related to some of my clients. Um, and I get it, I get it.
I think you're raising such important points, and I think um, pricing for services is an art. It's a big issue, and I feel like there's an aspect of it that's um, like broad and then like specific to the person too, and
Mm-hmm,
then
mm-hmm,
region, and so it's really varied. Like, and I really like the sliding scale framework. Um, and I often use that with clients. And then I'm honest with clients, like, if you have means, I would encourage you to pay my rate so that I can make it, like, so I can offer a spot to somebody who doesn't have the means. And I think it's important to
absolutely.
be honest. I've had clients who be like,
Yeah.
I'm going to pay you that, I'm going to pay you your rate because I want you to be able to offer. And it's very honest. I tell my client, I'm honest. But everybody, I think we've never been taught this. This is part of the failure of our training, right? Our
Mm,
training in social work school. We never
mm-hmm,
got these conversations. It was all
mm-hmm,
about us giving of ourselves until we burned out.
mm-hmm,
So we do need to have these conversations. And please share in the comments, like, if you are a practitioner, like, share your experiences with price, like setting your rates and sliding scales and things of that nature. Like, there are amazing resources out there. And I would say, as a spiritual practitioner, as a spiritualist, a spiritual social worker, I really, I found that I have underpriced myself a lot of times, especially thinking about like my spiritual work, like the
mm-hmm,
sort of energy labor that it takes. And so lately I've really been shifting that to like set my price a little higher, and
mm-hmm,
thinking about how my sliding scale fits in there. But yeah, like, it's also again around capacity, your like what your capacity is, right? What your needs are, what their needs are, like looking at it as a spectrum, like looking at those: honor capacity, honor your need, honor access. But we're not taught those things. And I think you're right. If we take a step back and look at it through this important lens, that it is, these are healing services that are devalued. Like, people really do not. And then also, people don't understand what we're doing. Like,
mm-hmm,
there's a lot of confusion about therapists, tarot readers, energy workers. Like,
mm-hmm,
there's a lot of confusion around, like, oh, you just sit and listen to people all day, or
mm-hmm.
you just sit and touch somebody. Like, that's not a lot of
Mhm,
work. I mean, there's so much labor
mhm.
going on, y'all. Like, this wellness, mental health work is it takes a lot of energy and labor, and we love
It
it,
does.
right? But it's also,
Yep.
it takes up a lot of our, and so
Mhm,
I think you're right. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and sometimes it is designed, most times it's designed for like space to devalue. Like, and we'll talk about it with the next topic around the 988 line. Like, there's a lot of misinformation about what wellness practitioners and healing practitioners do. And because of that misinformation, it makes us vulnerable to for judgment, critique when it comes to rates. Just one example.
mhm,
But there are a lot of
mhm.
other examples when it comes to like lack of awareness around what we do. Um,
I think that's a great point. That's a great point. Okay.
Do we want to move on?
Yeah, yeah. Let's definitely do that. Let's definitely do that. Okay.
So I want to pass it to
Um,
Sequoia because Sequoia's done such amazing research on this. Um, but the first thing I'll say is that on July 16th, which was a Saturday, um, on July 16th, the like the official crisis suicide and crisis lifeline was officially launched, the 988. And what that means is that the line previously, the 1-800, the National Suicide Prevention Line, still exists. But the idea was to have a number that was easier to access, that people will remember. And that line is officially live, y'all. But it comes with some stuff. So I'm going to, Sequoia, take it away.
yeah, I mean, I feel like this particular resource it has the potential to be very helpful, to fill in some gaps. Um, but there is a lot of kind of buzz, a lot of controversy around it. Some of the controversy related to 988 stems from um, geolocation and non-consensual um, service calls. So a non-consensual service call is if you access this particular line and you don't give your information and the person, the like crisis counselor or volunteer deems that you might need some additional support, they will um, you know call law enforcement, emergency services to come and check on you. So that's one of the kind of concerning things related to 988. The other piece is the kind of misinformation piece about what the focus is for 988. And then the surveillance piece, so the geolocation, like I mentioned, so those are kind of the concerns that I've seen about it. Some of the kind of helpful things, that I've seen about 988 is, again, a very specific kind of focus, right? So if you need local information, it's kind of similar to 211 and 311, but just in the mental health realm, right? So that's good. Um, they can connect you to peer support individuals. Now, I don't know if that is specific to every call center location, but I know that there are some that have access to being able to connect folks to peer support. Um,
According to the website, it's supposed to be available in anytime you call, regardless. I don't know how true
okay.
that is, but according to
Yeah.
their website, they said that that's part of the goal, that they're offering information and directing you to peer support if you need it. That's what it says.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, a lot of abolitionists, kind of mental health practitioners, have been highlighting this piece about geolocation, which is connected to surveillance, also data mining as well. The services that you can access through 988 kind of include the same things that you would be able to related to mental health apps. So text, chat, and a phone call. And so that brings in these questions about data, confidentiality, the algorithm, picking up the different words that you're saying, who's listening in on these calls related to the algorithm, and what is happening with that information once you hang up. Um, the other thing, that I saw that was pretty interesting as well, and this kind of gets into another piece. Some states have multiple call centers. Some states have one call center for the entire state. The commonality in all of that I saw is that the call centers are all predominantly, I'll say predominantly all nonprofit agencies, social service, you know, type centers. So, that brings in what is that work environment like for those particular call centers? Again, I mentioned like abolitionist social work. So we're talking about like nonprofit industrial complex, even that kind of system and setup and structure being a part of these call centers. If you have one call center for the entire state, what does a surge day look like when there may be, I don't know, between 3 to 8 people that might be, available in any given day? So a lot of questions, even about that piece of it.
I had to take a deep breath, but I remember as soon as it launched on the 16th, I was flooded with so many different perspectives about whether the night like this new line is really going to help. And um, it feels really scary, truthfully, to think about the call tracing. Um, if we're saying it's a confidential line, right? Um, but at the same time, you have to use their information to offer them to find them local resources. And if they were in crisis, true crisis, and when we say true crisis, like if the person is feeling suicidal and they don't feel safe, you use their information to find them like to get them quote unquote the support that they need. And I'm saying quotes because depending on the state, it could be law enforcement or it could be like a trained volunteers or counselors who will support you. But we know, y'all, we know in most cases it will be a law enforcement um, professional, depending on your state, right? Um, the other piece is what abolitionists have been talking about for a really long time is around the idea of being involuntarily hospitalized and that risk that comes with being in crisis. And we know when we're talking about the medical industrial complex and what happens to folks who are involuntary hospitalized or voluntarily hospitalized. You can volunteer and still your rights are still taken away from you. Like there's not a lot of like I don't know. It just feels really tricky. And it's interesting because for Sequoia and I, we're holding that we are mental health professionals, right? And like we're both in the work. And I still have a hard time with, and it's just like there's not a lot of clear ways to go about it. Like I think the peer support lines exist and I'm grateful for them. Like there is a lot of power in people connecting with somebody who's been through it, like the peer support lines, the warm lines. Those are people who've been through it and they're trained. They should have experience. There's a lot of power in talking to somebody who's been through it. I think there's, and at the same time, I know that there are some crises that require hospitalization. But I wish we didn't live in a system that treats people who are struggling, who are struggling with a psychiatric issue, as if they're a criminal, as if they're not human. Like I still find that hard to hold.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it doesn't feel like the 988 line is different than the 1-800 line, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and something that I did want Sequoia to share around her research, but I think we're all feeling it too, that I'll say is that there wasn't really a lot of clarity as to like the origins of the 988 line. Even if you just a quick Google search and you start researching like what, like why now, right? Or just being curious about who was a part of this, right? Like what are we hoping this line would do? Like there's still not a lot of clarity. I actually remember right before in June, late June, there was a story, and I'm in Philadelphia, where people in Philly and in Pennsylvania were really nervous because they were not prepared for the 988 line. And what we mean by that is that they didn't have resources yet to prepare for a line like this of this magnitude. And if that was in mid-June, I can't find the article right now, but I did read it a few days ago. This was like June 20. And this was supposed to roll out, this was rolling out July 16th. We know of some states who are still not prepared. Like Sequoia mentioned, there are some people where there's just one place that you can call, that you're directed to one call center. What if that call center is booked or the line is busy? You might get redirected to a law enforcement official. What happens
Definitely.
then? And we know that,
Definitely.
we know what happens when a law enforcement is involved, because their job is designed to criminalize people and dehumanize people. We know what happens. We know what happens to our people. And I mean our people who are navigating mental illness, like people who are vulnerable. And then, our people like BIPOC folks. But I think it's important to continue to be curious, to ask questions. I still feel like I need to do a little bit more research on my end. But it doesn't feel like there's something about this idea that there's a line that's available to offer you support. And then the minute you ask for that help, your rights are kind of taken away.
It's a lot, right before we went live, Biani and I was checking in on just a few of the different topics. And, you know, I I guess this whole conversation boils down to, at this point, are you going to refer folks to 9AA, or are you not going to? And my response was, I am, but I have to give additional information. I feel like, you know, um, I can't just say to folks, yes, call 988 as a resource. I feel like, and I know based on the things that I've been reading and pulling up, I have to give additional information about it, meaning to let folks know, look up on the website, if this is, like, if this is a center where there are trained volunteers, look up on the website if this is a center where there are crisis counselors that answer the call. Look up if this is a center, whether or not this 9AA call center shares the same space with 911 dispatch, right? Because
Yes.
that will be up to that person to decide if they want to move forward with utilizing that resource. So, yes,
I love
I
that. And
would,
I agree with
like,
you. I
yes,
agree
I
with you.
would refer,
Yep.
but it has to come with additional information.
Yes.
One
Like
also,
helping
the
them
other
make
reason,
oh,
go ahead.
I just want to say, you want to, I agree with you, helping them make an informed decision, having all
hmm
the information before they decide, and trusting in their right to self-determine. Like, yes,
hmm
I'm yes, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna continue to be posting about. I've been posting a lot about 9AA, like leading up to this podcast live stream. But then also, I'm gonna continue to put information out there, things that I've been finding. This is something that I haven't posted on my Instagram, but I found this amazing article in the New Social Worker about. Basically, like 9 things that you want to be mindful of. And one of the things that's important to know, and this goes along with that additional information, one of the things to be mindful of, and I am not saying that this is relevant to all the call centers, but this is, again, questions or additional information to provide to folks if you're going to refer them to 988. If someone is having some type of mental health crisis and substance is involved in that, this article is saying that many of the trained volunteers, crisis counselors, are not necessarily trained in how to assess for substance abuse or recovery types of mental health overlaps. Let me say it like that, right? Some of the other gaps that I saw related to 9AA, again, understaffed and under resourced. We mentioned the peer support piece, that you aren't automatically connected to peer support, that you talk to either a volunteer crisis person, crisis counselor, and then you have to ask to be transferred to a peer support person. The other gap that I saw was related to queer and trans services. Right now, there isn't any type of um, trans-specific like resource or service within 988. So when you call, you're getting someone who may or may not be trained on like the trans-specific kind of identity and impacts of mental health and things like that. And they aren't necessarily able to transfer you to a service or a line that has that type of access, because what I was reading was that the Trevor Project was initially associated with Lifeline, but because of the geolocation and surveillance piece, that was against their values. And so they didn't want to be associated with that. So there's just some additional information that you got to know. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot.
But
And
that's
that's
so
not even that. That's
powerful.
not even the half of it. That's not even
I
the
know.
half of it.
Well, y'all, this is what we're gonna say, and I was telling Sequoia this. Well, we're gonna keep having conversations about 988, and this is an important resource. Like, we want you to be informed. We want you to
Mm-hmm.
know. We want you to really be informed, and we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
work on being informed too. Like, that is the work too, because I'm also grateful that the resource is available. I'm grateful for the trained counselors, and I'm holding the nuance too, that there's also ways that we need to look at the shortcomings, the gaps, just like there's so many gaps that we need to consider and hold as part of the information. And that these are people who are doing it, who are volunteering. These people are volunteering, and there's not a lot of resources being put from our government, from this system, towards mental health support. So we're trying our best. All of us are trying our best to fill in these gaps, and it's still not enough. So, like, that's just the reality. We are going to continue to update you with more information as it comes around, because this is going to be like a process of learning and seeing how it works, and really making sure that you all know what you need to know before you call. If you ever, and actually, the reason I'm saying that in that way is because they also invite friends, family, loved ones to call the line for people that they might worry are in crisis. So you need to be informed too. It's not just for people who are navigating mental illness and crisis. It's also for the person that's in your life. Like, you want to be a true advocate. You need information. So let's move on to our last topic.
Okay, because
Long
I can
haul
go on and
COVID.
on and on, child. I can go
I
on
love
and
it,
on and
honey. I
on.
love it. I love it. So we're gonna Sequoia and I have been wanting to talk about long haul COVID and the survivors. And then there's this term that I didn't know of, but the CDC had posted it, long haulers, which I don't know. I'm still
Mm,
sitting with that term. But
mm-hmm,
we wanted to make space for introducing the topic, knowing that we're going to return to it in the coming episodes. But we wanted to make space to talk about long haul COVID, this, like, the survivors, people who are navigating that, families that are impacted by it, and what it means for our profession and for those who are offering support in the form of mental illness, mental health, spiritual support, wellness related support. Um, One thing about long haul COVID that's really interesting, many things are really interested about calling it long haul COVID, but for those who might not know, the CDC calls it post COVID conditions or long COVID. And apparently, there's a wide range of ongoing health problems that can last weeks, months, or years. The truth of it is, for many survivors, it's lasting years.
mm-hmm,
So there's also a lot of misinformation. I've been doing a lot of research around this topic the last couple of days, and like, people are still acting as if long haul COVID only lasts for a couple of weeks. But if we hear the stories of survivors, some people have been navigating this over a year or 2 years since the pandemic. And so it's a serious issue. It's a serious concern. Um, I'll share some symptoms, and then I'd love to hear from you, friend. So people who experience post-COVID issues or long haul COVID, tiredness, fatigue, it interferes with daily life. That's the key of it. Some symptoms get worse after physical or mental effort: fever, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, cough, chest pain, pounding heart, fast beating heart. I've heard that a lot from people who survived COVID, the
Mm-hmm.
pounding heart. I've heard that so many times. And then there are the neurological symptoms: difficulty thinking, concentrating, headaches, problems with sleep, struggles with focusing, dizziness, lightheadedness. Some people describe like a pins and needles kind of feeling, depression, still navigating changes in smell or taste. There's digestive systems, joint and muscle pain, rash, changes in bleeding, in their bleeding or menstrual cycle. And this is happening to people at a like really a long time. This is not something that just lasts weeks or months. For so many survivors, it's been a recurring issue. And so what does that mean for, you know, supporting survivors? Sequoia?
Yeah, I greatly appreciate, the way that you set that up, Biani. I got interested in long haul COVID. I'm a tweeter. I love Twitter, and so one day it was trending, and one of the reasons that it piqued my interest was because of two particular symptoms, and that was the psychosis and the neurological issues, and that
Mm,
made me think about, not only survivors, but then also, therapists or clinicians or, spiritual practitioners who also might, you know, identify as folks that have long haul COVID, and like, what does that mean for them and their practice? What does that mean related to mutual aid and, community resources and things like that? What does support look like for folks, for folks like us? How are we able to thrive and continue in our businesses, show up, for communities in the ways that we need to when, you know, we're being gaslit as a society that long haul COVID doesn't even exist, you know? So it's a really complex and layered topic. Um, but I think, when we center that in the value of community care and mutual aid, it's just something to continue to think about.
mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. There's a site, a resource of like patient advocates who are working with scientists and disease experts. It's called longcovidalliance.org. And what was striking to me was well, their numbers. According to Long COVID Alliance, they said at least 9.5 million have been impacted by long haul COVID. And and if that's correct, which I believe it is, because these people, this is a research institute as well, but if that's correct, why are we being gaslit? Why are people being told that those symptoms shouldn't be persisting at this rate? Like we need to listen to the people navigating this. They are the experts right now. Um, and yeah, you're right. What does it mean for those who are practitioners, for those who are parents, for those who are caretaking, for those who are offering healing support in any form? Like, what does it mean for their ability to be of service or be in a caring role? I mean,
Hmm.
I also think Sequoia and I want to bring attention to this for those who are tuning in because it's going to be a part of our lives for a really long time. You know,
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
I get a reaction to people. There have been people being like, oh, post pandemic, post COVID. And, it really is fascinating to me how quick we are to um, be in denial, have amnesia. It's the same. It's not the same, but it's similar. It's making me think of prolonged grief disorder too, like that diagnosis in particular. But, we need to make space for
Yes.
listening to survivors around long haul COVID and that the impact that it's having and it's not weeks and months, y'all. Like the CDC even kind of gaslighty, like, oh, some people report it's up to a year. Like, listen to the survivors, listen to the patients, let them drive this advocacy and this push for supporting folks
Hmm.
dealing with these conditions, because COVID is not over for them. Calling it post COVID is just wrong. It's a long haul COVID. they are navigating COVID still. The impact of COVID is still impacting their bodies, their nervous systems, their neurology, like their cognition. It is not over. And us as practitioners, we need to really be aware
Yep.
and educate ourselves. And we will have
Definitely.
more to come around this too, because we think it's an important issue to pay attention to as healers
For sure. For
and
sure.
spiritualists.
Thank you so much for that, Biani. I, just want to offer for folks, like, if that's something that you're interested in looking more into, on Twitter, you can go to the hashtag long haul COVID, and there are stories there, resources there. Biani just mentioned one. And yeah, we'll keep talking about this. Please definitely continue to support the podcast. As we've mentioned before, you can subscribe to the channel. We will greatly appreciate that, so that you can be notified when we go live, or when we post, new information, new videos for you all. You can continue to support us by signing up for the newsletter at the website, Reclaiming Soul Work pod.com. You can also find that information in the About tab on YouTube, and then also on Spotify. Um, Definitely like, comment, share, let us know what you think about these topics. We are going to move on to our last topic for the night, which is prolonged grief disorder, which is a new addition to the DSM, the diagnostic.
Oh,
What's
statistical
the S?
manual,
Statistical manual.
diagnostic
Thank you.
statistical manual.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I appreciate that. Yes, to the DSM, and there are quite a few articles out about this addition to the DSM that gives, some perspectives on the support for the disorder, but then also dissent related to, making this particular kind of aspect of our natural course of development over our lifetime a disorder. And I know that, Biani, we've talked about this topic quite a bit, and specifically related to grief. Again, that is a part of our natural kind of development over our lifetime. Like, we navigate grief and loss, Um, but what does that mean to be diagnosed, with prolonged grief disorder? What does that look like related to capitalism, related to even white supremacy, to a certain extent, right? Because we're talking about, again, uh, culturally responsive care. Are we pathologizing, a normal type of part of our development? Those are kind of the things that I think of whenever I hear this topic.
I, thank you for that. I actually want to read the
Mhm.
definition so that we know,
Please.
so we understand like the definition that's being used. And I'm not going to get into the nerdy stuff around the DSM and how we use it, but it's actually falling under trauma and stress related disorders, which is interesting. But the definition is defined as an intense yearning or longing for the deceased, often with intense sorrow and emotional pain, and a preoccupation with thoughts or memories of the deceased. I think that's interesting. I'm just going to, the intense longing, the intense yearning, that is sort of the reaction people have been having around this, like this definition and like why it's in the DSM. But calling it a disorder is something that just is fascinating to me. And some people are calling it chronic mourning. That's been like another term for it, because y'all, words have power. Words are spells, right? Like, communication is really important. And so the term prolonged grief disorder, we just look at the term prolonged, it kind of already assumes that grief has an end. It already suggests to us that grief has an end. And if we really hold that to be, if we hold that as people who have grieved, who experience bereavement, is that really true? Does grief really end? This is my question right now, in
I
case you have
completely
one or
agree.
two.
Yes, I completely agree with that. Again, that's this patholo pathologizing, of this natural process. And for me, it doesn't leave space for um, cultural approaches to grief. You know, it doesn't leave space for um, a lot of our practices, and our meaning like BIPOC, QT BIPOC, indigenous communities, around the way that we process grief. And I think that point that you made about, it assumes that there is an end to grief. Um, is really interesting. The other thing, that I have an issue with, and I mentioned this related to capitalism, but connecting this to, like work. So if you go to a therapist and they're coding prolonged grief disorder through your insurance, what does that mean related to some employers? Does that open folks up in a different kind of way related to this particular diagnosis? I don't know. I just wonder about that.
Yeah, and that there's sort of like a timetable for how long this state of grief happens. Other terms that people
Hmm.
use to call it PGD, like it was just complicated grief, traumatic grief, persistent complex bereavement. And yeah, you're right. What does it mean for everyday, like people who are navigating this? What does it mean for their ability to work or not work? Or does it mean that people start to like decide how long you should be grieving for? Um, and this idea of intense longing is resonating for me in this article that I read um, by a writer who's also a mother, who was a mother to a child who died in the Columbine shootings in 1999. And she wrote this amazing piece. It was like a letter to her daughter, a letter to her late daughter. But I want to read a quote because I think it's she called it long grievers. She called herself a long griever, which I think is a beautiful way to think
Hmm.
about it. But she was like, um, so many quotes that I picked from here. Intense longing for you've been gone now more than 20 years. The experts have decided my grief merits a diagnosis. We long grievers are not being morose. Our bodies are no longer racked each day with sobbing. Our eyes may not be puffy and red. We've had moments of joy and hope to have many more. Grief, neatly packaged and time limited, so no one else is looking from the outside and doesn't have to be uncomfortable. I think there's something there, right? Like
There's
we put a
something there.
woo. I mean, part of it is because we live in a society that doesn't allow for grief. And there's something about packaging it neatly. If you've had a traumatic grief, it quote unquote, it only lasts a certain amount of time. If it's going on for longer, that's not grief. Like we live in a culture that does not allow for grief. So a prolonged grief disorder is in alignment with that because we live in this system that cares about profit, that cares about our bodies being labor. So this idea of us grieving for a long time. I mean, her daughter was this was over 20 years ago. Do you know? Like, right, what does it mean for long grievers like us? There are things that I'm grieving from, like there's not a lot of space.
Absolutely.
It's really concerning that that's the progressive push that the DSM and these psychiatrists made. Like, let's acknowledge PGD. And also, are we doing it? And who gets to decide who's grieving? So many of us are navigating pandemic grief. Why is that not being talked about? But we get to decide as clinicians whose grief is more like traumatic.
I
I mean,
don't
we're gonna
like
keep
it.
talking about
I
this,
don't
y'all.
like
But
it.
I
Yes,
don't
I
like
don't
it.
like it. Mm-mm, mm-mm, mm-mm. I don't like that. Mm-mm, mm-mm, mm-mm.
One thing that this person says, one thing that this person says that I think is really powerful is that the wording is really important. The intense yearning. It sounds like addiction, right? This
Mm,
intense yearning, this intense longing.
mm,
And I
mm.
think words are really powerful. Why intense yearning and intense longing? What is wrong with that? And also, it kind of borders in this, the language is important. There's something there. There's something there around space. Are we calling that an addiction? Like, what does it mean, intense yearning?
Yes.
At least through the
Yes.
DSM, through the lens of DSM in this country. Well,
Yes.
what were you going to say, Sequoia?
Oof. I don't know. That just that, there I would like more conversation about this particular topic. I wonder how other spiritual mental health practitioners kind of feel about this particular disorder, and absolutely within the realm that you've been mentioning. um, I think it's important. I think it's important to continue this conversation, because I don't like it. I don't like it not one bit.
Yeah, and if you're tuning in, watching the playback, please let us know your thoughts on PGD.
Hmm.
We really
Hmm.
welcome, we want to have really nuanced conversations about this, because I imagine that there's some good coming out of it. Actually, let me take that back. Perhaps there's some good coming out of this diagnosis. But with the history of the DSM, like, I remember PTSD, and when that sort of came into the fray, and now we have like complex PTSD. I mean, I think the DSM is really something that we need to continue to interrogate and be critical of as practitioners. But sure, if you all have had experience with this already, please let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Please just share what your thoughts around it. We'd love to hear from long grievers or folks who are, maybe really benefiting from having this diagnosis. Maybe it's really helping, and it could be. We'd love to hear from you for sure. So that's it. That's our last topic. Okay.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. This is the part where we kind of get into main takeaways.
why don't you go?
Okay. All right. Yeah, so many good ones. I mean, just coming off of this topic about prolonged grief disorder, it's just something that I want to continue to gather perspectives on, how people are supporting this. Like, what is their logic and analysis around supporting this particular disorder? I want to continue to look at, what are folks' logic and analysis around dissent related to this disorder. I want to know and see what are the long-term impacts of this particular disorder. How is this going to look? Um, the other thing, main takeaway is definitely 988. Like, I have so much more to say about that. But again, with that one, the takeaway would be, utilize the resource, but also know that it comes with additional information. Definitely go to the website to find out what centers are in your area, what type of center it is. Ask questions of folks, that are on the call related to what their process is. Yeah, like that's my main takeaway.
I agree. I think there were so many gems today, and I can't really pick one. But I think the takeaway for me is around the theme of really being able to ask questions, give yourself permission to trust your intuition if things don't feel like, trust yourself. And if you are feeling some doubt or suspicion, get more information. I feel like that's sort of a theme that I felt throughout our conversation today. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about grief. I I think so many of us are navigating pandemic grief. I feel like it comes and goes at times. And so I
Definitely.
also feel the same way. Like, what does it mean for PGD, this disorder? What does it mean for the state of the way that we provide services? And what does it mean for how we think about grief? It's something we talked about. Watch episode 5 when we talked about like like AI technology with Alexa, like tune into that. Like, what does it mean for how we grieve in this day and age? And what does it mean for the state of like mental health? Um, the 988 line, y'all. I mean, there's so many gems around that. I think another takeaway is around accessibility. Is something that I'm really sitting with, and I've learned so much from our conversation today. And yeah, just thinking about what does it mean to provide access, be accessible. What does it mean to honor my capacity and my need, and encouraging us as healers and spiritualists and practitioners to also include themselves when we're talking about access and accessibility. So that stayed with me.
Yeah, cool.
All right, y'all. So I have a lot of feelings because, like Sequoia said, this is our last episode of this season. Um, and I just want to say I'm so proud of us because we really worked hard to create a space like this, and we hope that you've enjoyed yourself and that you might come back and check out rewatch some of this or re-listen to some of these episodes. And just know that this is our last episode of the season, but we're taking a break. We will be back in the fall, in September 5th to be exact. And we're going to have some amazing new episodes. We're including special guests and interviews from folks in the community. And so we're really excited about that, to bring that to you, to bring you more important, rich, and dope conversations that will really, we hope, nourish you and inspire you and motivate you to do this work through the spiritual and soul work lens. So in the meantime, rewatch these episodes if you like and comment, subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already, and share with others who you feel like really might enjoy this vibe. And we'll see you in September.
Yes. Yes. Nice. Nice. Thanks again for being in community with us and supporting a heart centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersections of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. We love to continue to stay connected with you all. Definitely stay tuned. There will be, some little treats here and there on the break for you all. Because we're gonna miss you all. So, we definitely want to stay in contact with you. Leave us comments. Um, Subscribe, follow the newsletter. That'll be a sure way that we'll stay in contact with you all. We'll definitely be giving updates and circle backs to a lot of the gems that we've laid out in our first season. Woohoo!
We did it.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. Yeah, if we don't catch you on YouTube, you can catch us on IG. Um, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. So grateful. Thank you so much for
Okay,
the support these past couple of months. So hopefully we'll see ya. See ya soon.
definitely.